and I am Evan with Tallison, and mostly going to focus on Milwaukee Brewers. I don't get to do that enough. This is kind of the time of year to do it with, I talk a lot of Packers, but with this being kind of the downtime in NFL where we're reaching and trying to find stories about any little thing, try to talk a little bit more Brewers. And today I've had him on the show. It's been a while, but thanks to returning to the show is Matt Carroll. Appreciate you coming on. Once again, it's been a little while since I've had you on.
Yeah, a couple of years, I think, actually, at this point. Trying to remember, but glad to be back.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And the Brewers lead in the division by 7 games currently at 39-27 coming into tonight. The new starting pitcher, once again, stop me if you've heard that one before. Carlos Rodriguez getting his first start of his big league career, caught up today. And Brewers injuries keep happening now with Robert Gasser likely done for the season, and who knows what's going on with DL Hall, and more injuries keep happening. But for some reason, somehow, Brewers are sitting at 39-27 and tearing it up at home currently after struggling a little bit early on. Thoughts so far? We're about 3 months into the season. What are your thoughts so far on the team?
I mean, they exceeded my expectations. Not that I didn't expect them to do well this year, but I don't think any of us expected the Brewers to have the 5th best offense in baseball coming into today, which is exactly what they are at just a tad under 5 runs a game. I mean, you look at last year and they were hovering right around that 4 runs a game mark. They were under it at certain times a year, and they honestly just didn't add a ton to the offense. I mean, obviously they brought in Rhys Hoskins, but it took, some guys, stepping up from last year, like a Bryce Terang, some other guys kind of, turning things around, like Willy Adames looking a little bit better, Christian Yelich, outside of being hurt, starting to look a little bit better. That offense has been firing on all cylinders pretty much all year. The bullpen has, kind of done its thing like it normally does. Maybe not quite to the extent of last year, but still very, very solid. And the starting pitching for all the woes that they've had injury related this year, the starting pitching staff has held up for the Brewers. They're kind of middle of the pack ERA wise. Last I took a look, but they have called on anyone and everyone at this point to fill out that staff. And it's been just good enough to support that offense and let the Brewers be in the position they're in. Certainly helps that the rest of the NL Central has not been great this year. At last check, all the other 4 teams were under 500. I don't remember if that's still the case, but that kind of goes to show the state of the division. Regardless, you still got to win the games that are on your schedule, and the Brewers, for the most part, have done that, and they are where they are.
Yeah, as of Fox Sports standings as of now, every team but the Brewers are still under 500. Cubs last check are 32-34. Same with the Reds. Cardinals 31-33, and the Pirates 31-34. Jump to the Cubs really quick, and we're not going to talk Cubs, but there's one person in particular in Chicago do want to kind of bring up, because him going down to Chicago gave Pat Murphy his opportunity to be a full-time manager in the big leagues for the first time. He was an interim coach in San Diego briefly, but now he's the lead man. He's the lead. The full-time manager. What are your thoughts on the job Pat Murphy's doing thus far, and what's he doing different in your eyes than Craig Counsell is doing, if anything?
I think Pat Murphy, first off, has been fantastic this year. I think he is, for the most part, pushed the right buttons. There, outside of just a couple kind of small things, there haven't been a whole lot of decisions that I've disagreed with him personally, and that I have seen fans disagree with either. You don't get a whole lot of that, on social media and stuff. And you certainly did with Counsell, after the years, especially on certain bullpen decisions and kind of things like that. Murphy seems to be doing well in terms of the decision making. He's got the Brewers kind of just playing with a little bit of an edge, which is kind of mirrors Murphy himself. He's a kind of, tell it how it is type of guy. They'll crack a joke in there every once in a while too, as opposed to Counsell that was a little bit more, kind of towed the line some, never wanted to be too controversial, would start the, every answer to a press conference by rubbing his hand through his hair and saying, look, guys, and, kind of giving you a half answer to a lot of things. You're not going to get that from Murphy. And you've kind of seen with this team, they've been, more aggressive on the base paths. They've gotten a couple little scraps with other teams, whether it was, instigated by the Brewers or not. It's just they're playing with a different type of edge than I feel like they ever did under Counsell, and it's led to a really cohesive unit and one that's been successful in a lot of different ways in terms of the on the field. I don't think there's been, outside of the much more aggressive base running, I would say a little bit different of an approach at the plate, but I wouldn't say there's been too terribly much different. Murphy just has these boys just feeling a little different, it seems, and that is making a difference, apparently.
One of the reasons why I like the hiring of Murphy is we kind of saw with your Terang, your Mitchell, your Freelick, Weimer, the Brewers are trying to go more young. Goodbye to Rowdy Tellez, goodbye to Jesse Winkler. Yeah, they got Hoskins, but for the most part, it's looking like they're trying to go younger. And the fact that he was a very successful college baseball coach, that was one of the things I liked about the hiring. Do you think that helps him connect to the younger players on the roster? Because the younger guys, Terang, for example, Ortiz, who unfortunately was scratched from tonight's game, and we've seen spurts of Jackson Chorio's talent. Do you think that helps him connect to the roster a little bit, that he has experience working in the college game?
I think it's got to help at least a little bit. He's certainly been open, feels like a little bit more open to playing those young players than Counsell. Not that Counsell was, by any means opposed to it and only ever played veterans, but I feel like there were some times where he kind of strayed away from the young guys, just here and there, not constantly. Obviously, the Brewers, Counsell did come up with the Burns, Woodruff, Peralta combo when they were very young. So he embraced that a little bit, but Murphy seems to a little bit more. And I think you're exactly right that probably that experience in the college really helped them do that even more effectively. He knows how to talk to those, 18 to 21, 22-year-olds, that kind of demographic. These guys are aged just a little bit more than them, but not by much for some of them, and not at all when in the case of Jackson Churio. One thing I've really liked about Murphy and listening to him talk is he strikes a really good balance of having some of that old school mentality, but also embracing change and things that, are new, but have been proven to help winning baseball teams. Like he'll look at the analytics, but he'll also go with his gut feeling. It's a little bit here and there. And I feel like there's not enough managers who kind of do that. The successful ones do that. But you can't be all completely stuck in the past. But we've seen you can't solely rely on just like new age data analytics, because not everything is about the numbers either. And so just listening to him talk about how, if there's a good way to do something, if there's a better way to do something than how they're doing it right now, by all means, he'll look into it. And I think having that open mind, helps with, again, not all of those parts, but also the, playing the best player and doing what needs to be done with young players to kind of accelerate their growth. They haven't sent Churio back down to the minor leagues. They've given him some days off here and there to, work on his hitting to the side and to, kind of just take a breather as he's going through his first major league season. But they've never sent him down because he believes that he needs that valuable experience up here. And I think he's gone about these young guys the right way. And I think that college experience probably helped that quite a bit.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with leaving Jackson up on the big league roster for the fact if you send him down to AAA, he's just going to go down there and tear it all up, kind of like what we saw with another Brewer prospect in Keston Hira. Every time he was in Nashville, he tore it up, but he couldn't quite put it together at the big league level. There's nothing gonna benefit. I know Jackson's a much better prospect, but there's gonna be no benefit for him going down to Nashville and raking down there when he can learn how to hit at the big league level, which I think is extremely important in his development. But Matt Carroll, reviewing the brew.com and Cold Brew podcast as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Now, injuries aside, because we also can't control injuries either, but we're going to talk about that in a moment. Biggest concerns of this 2024 Brewer team?
Right now, the concern is that starting pitching staff. How long can they hold out with kind of what they currently have, which could be different 4 days from now, the way the injuries have kind of hit them? They started the season off with a starting rotation of Freddie Peralta, Wade Miley, Colin Ray, DL Hall, and Jacob Junis. Only 2 of those guys remain, Peralta and Ray, who have been very solid. And Colin Ray has been, we got to give props to him. He's been fantastic this year, even better than he was last year as kind of a fill-in. But they're down 3 starting pitchers, and then they're down starting pitchers who've even filled in for those starting pitchers. So they've managed to be able to get by. Robert Gasser came up, had a very good 5 starts before. Unfortunately, he ended up going on the injured list. Bryce Wilson, I know his last outing didn't go so great, but for the most part, he has filled in very well at the top in that starting rotation. But how long can he kind of last? He was able to kind of blossom again as a pitcher with the Brewers as a reliever last year. And so will he continue finding success as a starter? Will some of these younger guys, you mentioned Carlos Rodriguez starting tonight. I have, my own little bits of worries with him because he had kind of a rough start to the year. He wasn't quite as highly regarded as Gasser. And so I'm interested to see if he does end up doing well. But if he doesn't, then you're looking back at Aaron Ashby. You're looking back at, who else after that. And so my concern is definitely that starting pitching staff, whether they can continue to hold it together and how fast the Brewers do or don't decide to make some sort of a move to reinforce it to, again, support the offense. You've got an offense right now this year that could make a run in a postseason, but they're only going to do so if they have the pitching to support it. And so you've got to evaluate that as Brewers GM Matt Arnold. When do we make that move? How big of a move do we make? How many moves do we make just in regards to that starting rotation? It's held up. They patched it. They put on those Band-Aids, but how long do they continue to stick?
Yeah, we're going to talk moves in a moment. I want to get your thoughts on Carlos Rodriguez as the game's already started. You just never know how long a young pitcher is going to last before being moved out of the game and how that quickly baseball moves right now. For those tuning in to watch the Brewers, what can we expect from Carlos Rodriguez tonight? I think he's about 3 or 4 pitches in, a couple balls, a strike, and a couple foul balls on strikes. What can we expect from him tonight?
So Carlos Rodriguez is, he's not going to blow anyone away, but he has a lot of tools at his disposal. He's got a whole bunch of different pitches that he uses, and he keeps hitters guessing, and that's how he has ended up finding success. Luckily, they have a really good catcher in William Contreras. He was able to do a really good job calling games for Robert Gasser and kind of maximize the success out of him. So that's something that could end up helping Rodriguez even more or to find even more success than he found in the minors. But at the same time, he's not a high velocity guy. None of his single pitches are necessarily, overly fooling hitters. It's the fact that he has so many different ones that is what keeps hitters from being able to really lock in on him. So are they able to utilize that pitch mix to the best of their ability? If they do, that's how Rodriguez is going to be successful. But if they don't, again, he's not a dominant type of pitcher. So could go a little bit either way. He could, really confuse hitters and then end up having some good outings, or he could end up getting blown up and sent back to the minors. His minor league season so far in AAA was definitely, a tale of 2 halves. His first 6 starts of the season, he had an ERA over 8 going into the end of April. coming out of April, he hasn't had a outing where he's given up more than 3 earned runs. 3 of his outings, he gave up 1 earned run. So, he looked really bad, and then he looked really good. So you see a little bit of the Jekyll and Hyde there. If he does well, it's because he's throwing every pitch that you can imagine.
Well, he is through the first inning without any damage. I think he got away with one pitch that got lucky, didn't go over the fence. But with some nice defensive by Adames and Hoskins, he's through the first inning with nothing allowed. So we'll see how he continues throughout this game. Talked about needing to potentially trade for some starting pitching. Who's available on the market in your mind that the Brewers could realistically go after? They're clearly not the only team that needs starting pitching. Who can they realistically go after? Who are some names that Brewer fans should be on the lookout for?
I think the 2 teams that kind of first come to mind that I've seen mentioned out there a lot are the Marlins and the Mets, and both of those teams have an assortment of starting pitchers that they could end up trading here. I know one of the big names out there is Garrett Crochet with the White Sox, and the White Sox are horrible. They will clearly be selling someone come deadline time, but I've seen some reports lately. Bob Nightingale, USA Today, MLB Insider, has stated that a lot in the industry don't think they're going to move Crochet, even though they could get a king's ransom for him. But he's got a lot of control. He's really started to kind of blossom. Injury concerns might kind of tamper down the return as well to them, so they might just hold on to him and have him be a part of their future. But if you look at the Marlins, first name that comes to mind there, Jesus Luzardo. Brewers got to see him up close and personal the other day. He shut the Brewers down during his outing against them, and so that's one where he's got a couple years of control himself. So he'll, demand some resources, but would be someone you could bring in to be a solid number 2 guy behind Freddie more than just this year. You look at the Mets, and for whatever reason, with all the money they have, they're never able to figure it out. And so they may be looking to unload some of their pitchers, whether they do actually move a Severino, a Jose Quintana. Do you want to bring him in? He hasn't been super great, but sometimes those deadline moves to a new city end up working for a pitcher. And he's had success in Milwaukee, just unfortunately against Milwaukee. So you could see if you want to turn it around there. But I'd look towards those 2 teams. Also, a name that I could see moving possibly with the Angels, who have fallen pretty quickly there, is Tyler Anderson. I could definitely see him being a starter that ends up getting moved from their side because, again, it looks like they may end up being sellers again themselves.
Now, you're obviously going to have to give up to get. Pitching doesn't come cheap, especially when you're going to have teams that are looking for it. Who are some guys that the Brewers could potentially use in potential packages to get some of these pitchers like a Luzardo that you talked about?
Mm-hmm. I honestly, when it comes to the Brewers system, I don't think they currently consider anyone untouchable, really. The closest to that would be Jacob Mizorowski, the fireballing pitcher down in Double-A. But I think there's enough questions about his control, even as a reliever, where for the right price, he could be had. Other than that, I think literally anyone's on the table. You're looking at a guy like Luzardo, for example, who has years of control ahead of him. He's an established starter. He's had solid seasons in Miami. I think you're considering moving at least a Brock Wilken or a Tyler Black as kind of the centerpiece of that trade. Preferably not both, but I think that's where you would start with a decision. Whether it's him, whether it's a Garrett Crochet, if it's one of those big name guys, you're probably starting with one of those, a team looking to acquire an offensive piece. And then after that, you're probably trying to keep it to, you could throw Luis Lara in there, an outfielder who's young and, has a lot ahead of him. He's been really impressive, but, he doesn't come really with any power. He's 5'7", so, you question, what he'll build into in terms of strength. But very, very athletic kid. You could potentially package him together as well. For pitching outside of Mizorowski and Gasser and Rodriguez, you kind of start to go down the system a little bit, but there are some, low A, high A guys that they've drafted in the last 2 years. Brett Wysharowski is one I think of. There's ways that you could package it together for that. The Brewers have one of the deepest systems in the league. They could definitely put together any package for any player that they wanted to be able to bring him in.
You brought up Mizorowski and the control concerns, the control issues that he's been having a little bit. When do you think we see Mizorowski? Do we see him at all this year, or is it more of a next year thing that we see him, or is it something that the injuries might force their hand before they think he's ready?
I could very much see him as like a September call-up in the bullpen. Think Corbin Burns when they first brought him up. Their intent all along was for him to be a starter, but with that, how awesome that team was in 2018, they brought Burns in that year as a reliever to just help that bullpen be even more dominant than it already was to start the season. I could see the same thing with Mizorowski because, with the control concerns, you could still get by with him as a reliever. He's certainly got the stuff to blow guys away at any level. I mean, it is so impressive. If anyone had a chance to watch him in the Futures game last year, I mean, he held his own against any prospect he came up against that day. And he continues to do so down there. He'll hit AAA at some point this year. The Brewers have continued to work him out as a starter. All of his appearances this year in AA have been as a starting pitcher. And so they're continuing that route until they decide they're not going to anymore. But I could definitely see him as a late call-up. I think they have enough weapons in the bullpen that they're able to kind of interchange between, shuffling guys back and forth between AAA to where the bullpen isn't really a concern for the Brewers too terribly much. But when you get those extra, roster spots in September, that's where maybe you start to see Mizorowski end up coming up and just be another guy where you can bring him in for a few batters, throw 100 miles an hour and blow some guys away, and then, take them right back out.
And the thing to remember about Mizorowski, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe he's on the 40-man roster right now, so you definitely need to make some roster move to make him available, and that probably would play a little bit on deciding if they were going to bring him up or not. I'm sure that has a lot to do with it too. So
right.
Freddie Peralta. I know we've been talking minors. I want to jump to him. Sometimes we see Freddie Peralta and the potential that he shows being a number one type pitcher, but the last couple of starts, and it's pretty much been his career for the most part, we sometimes see fastball Freddie, we sometimes see Willie Peralta. And I bring up former Brewer Willie Peralta and then as another guy that on paper had some really good stuff, but it was just inconsistent at times. I think Peralta's moved a little bit beyond the inconsistencies that Willie Peralta had, but couldn't seem to get anybody out his last two starts.
Yeah, his last start in particular, a lot of people were concerned that his velocity came down quite a bit in those last couple of innings of that outing, wondering is there some injury that we don't know about or he doesn't even know about yet. But he had said after the game he was just trying to focus so hard on getting guys out that he kind of just wasn't letting it fly really, and that ended up bringing down the velocity. So I don't think there's anything to worry about in that sense from everything we've been told. But yeah, and again, that's not just Peralta, that's William Contreras too. He's the one also helping call that game. I think parts of it are, he'll go too heavy in one direction on certain pitches in some games. Sometimes it's just plain missing his spots. That'll happen. Then that's when you get, obviously your homers or your, extra base hits against him. He's still, for the most part, I would say performed very well this year. I'm not worried about him being the team's ace. But yeah, he does have those little blips here and there. And they have happened most years that he's been around. Even last year, he had, kind of a rough patch at the beginning before he really, really was very good after the All-Star break. So, it's something that, he just needs to grow through and kind of recognize when it's happening, what's causing it, and make sure that he's either adjusting in game or adjusting for the next game. But he's gotten to that point now where, he is a veteran. He is starting to pick up on those things, and where those used to last for multiple games at the beginning of his career, now you're looking at maybe him, like I said, him fixing it in game, or only going a game or two before kind of saying, oh, okay, this is what I was doing with my mechanics, and then kind of turn things around. That's what a veteran pitcher does, and that's why other players are starting to look up to Freddie Peralta. I love the story I heard lately about him taking Jackson Chourio aside in the tunnel and kind of, telling him, don't get down on yourself. You know how talented you are. Just do what you do and everything's going to be fine. Everyone's here to support you. And lo and behold, Chourio kind of, almost turned it around a little bit since then, definitely defensively, but now he's been looking good at the plate too. He's taking it upon himself to be that veteran, but that also, what comes with that is, focusing on your own game too. And I think he goes through those spurts for, like I said, less of an amount of time than he used to. And that's what, veteran players do.
Yeah, and I don't mean to, give you some horror flashbacks of Willie Peralta, but control issues here and there, they both have the problem, and it's just a coincidence they're both named Peralta, so I can make that comparison, I guess. Looking at the bullpen, you brought up the bullpen as being one of the strengths right now. Haven't seen Devin Williams at all this season. You have Brian Hudson, who has pitched just incredible, and I thank you, the Dodgers, for just giving him away. Koenig's been very good. Miguel has really stepped up in that closer role, and Hobie Milner is Hobie. I don't know what else to say. But then you got Elvis Peguero and Joel Payampas. There's got to be an odd man out in that bunch when Steven comes back, or are they going to be able to fit all those guys into the bullpen?
Yeah, I mean, I think those guys end up kind of sticking. You do have still a couple other guys. You've got Enoli Paredes, I believe, is still up with the team. They had just sent down, I can't remember who just went down today, in place of Rodriguez coming up. James Meeker, he was an indie ball guy the Brewers got a couple years ago. He had just been called up to the bigs for the first time in his career. He ended up actually getting DFA'd because of one of those. That's what ends up happening when you have that much many good guys. And Herget was actually the one who went down today, now that I think about it. But yeah, eventually you're going to have Dale Hall has gone back to his rehab assignment. He's going to come back at some point, and they said likely as a reliever to start. When Jacob Junis comes back, he'll likely be a reliever to start. So that's guys you need to end up finding space for, and it's going to be tough. Jared Koenig might end up being one of those guys. As great as he's been really in the bullpen, especially recently, he's got options, and so he might be one of the guys to go. Paredes too could end up getting sent down, but that's a good problem to have. Like having a bunch of different guys, having those options. There were some of these guys that we knew were going to be a little bit back and forth, and haven't even actually touched on Taylor Clark yet. I know a lot of people kind of forgot about him. He was a off-season acquisition. He could be up any day now. He's past his rehab. He's made several appearances down there at AAA Nashville. He was expected to be another big part of the bullpen who would kind of go back and forth due to his minor league options. It's that good old, AAA Nashville shuttle where you see the pitchers going back and forth over the course of the year. That's what the Brewers do, and that is one thing that hasn't been different under Pat Murphy, that's for sure.
And before I let you go, outfield, you have Garrett Mitchell coming back, which I'm high on Garrett Mitchell, but I do state that we do kind of have to maybe tap the brakes a little bit on him because we don't really know what type of player Garrett Mitchell is, because every time he looks like he's going to, do something, he's hurt. Mm-hmm. I hate to say it, but it's true. But you have Sel Frelick, Blake Perkins, and Jackson Chourio, and I'm leaving Yelich out intentionally because I think he's going to continue. He's probably going to maybe play more DH once, potentially. Mm-hmm. But between those three, and then you have Mitchell coming back too, it's kind of a bit of a logjam in the outfield. You can only play 3 guys. Perkins has definitely showed that he deserves playing time. How do they fit Mitchell into that rotation?
Yeah, that's a really good question because you're right. You can only play the 3. They do want to continue to get Yelich playing time in that outfield. He wants to continue playing in the outfield, and honestly, he's done well. His arm is actually, they've really worked with him on his throwing and his arm over the last couple of years. We saw him gun down Tommy Pham the other day, but that's not exactly a new thing. Like, he's defensively really kind of come around a little bit after dipping down some during some of those rough offensive years too. So I think he ends up being in there. You may end up seeing him come in for Perkins as a little bit of a lefty righty switch. So that may be what kind of determines it. Is you can go lefty, you can go with an all lefty lineup of Yelich, Frelick, and Garrett Mitchell with certain righties who may be particularly susceptible to that left-handed hitting, and see him sitting more when it goes the other way around, when you need Perkins and Churio in the game against lefties. So they may be just platooning some more. They may also just kind of slowly work him back. I actually just saw it earlier today that they're considering kind of cutting his rehab a little bit shorter and having him, work through things through appearances at the big league level instead, once they feel like he's ready to do so. If that's the case, then it's kind of a kick the can down the road situation a little bit, where you worry about it some more later. You may end up having guys slump. I know Perkins had, after that hot start, he slumped a little bit before he caught fire again. But it may just be riding the hot hand. And again, having all those resources is a good problem to have, especially in the outfield. The Brewers have always had lots of outfield depth. And sometimes when it felt like they had, plenty of outfielders, they go out and add more because that's just what they do. So keep having that problem and figure it out later.
We don't know what's going to happen with Joey Ortiz. Got scratched from today with a hamstring soreness. But is it safe to assume that when Mitchell returns to the lineup, it's going to be one of Bowers, Dunn, or Monasterio that don't really have a home in this lineup? Is that kind of safe to assume?
I think so. And honestly, I'd probably go with Monasterio would be the one for me. They seem to really like Jake Bowers and getting him opportunities. He helps the defense here and there when Hoskins is DHing. So I don't think it'll be him. I'd coin flip a little bit between Dunn and Monasterio, but it just seems in kind of the natural order of things with the Brewers, that Monasterio has been a little bit farther down the totem pole. And he honestly hasn't performed particularly well in his appearances he has gotten with the Brewers. So not that Dunn has either, but he's been a little bit better than Monasterio. So he'd be the odd man out, I would think, when Mitchell returns, but we'll see.
Was it surprising seeing Monasterio first base on Sunday? What do you think they were trying to get him some reps there?
I don't know, because he said it was the first time he had ever started a game at first base at any professional level. So they were definitely trying something different there in that situation. So I was very surprised to see it. You got to do that with these guys, though. You've got to give them shots here and there. Doesn't mean you need to play them, 4 days a week, because you can't do that with everyone. But you got to give them opportunities sometimes and hope that, eventually things will, click for him at some point. It just hasn't quite for Monasterio. He was a relatively consistent guy for the Brewers last year when the offense struggled at times. And this year, that just hasn't been the case. So you give him chances when you can, even if you got to get creative with it. But I don't think he lasts too terribly much longer, especially with what we know about Mitchell's potential timetable for return.
Yeah, I was just wondering, and one of the reasons I was asking is, could they be giving Monasterio some reps at first, being we know where his versatility, we know how he is pretty versatile. He can play third or second or short. Do they want to see if he can handle first base too? Because Bowers can play outfield and first base. Mm-hmm. Well, not going to need Bowers in the outfield once Mitchell's back. Are they trying to see if Monasterio can handle that position too and try to make the decision a little easier for them?
Yeah, I think the Brewers have always for years really tried to maximize. They love versatile guys. They love positional versatility. And you saw it last year when they, or the year before, I suppose it was really, when Terang was still down in the minors and they started adding third base and center field to his repertoire. They never really ended up continuing to explore that at the big league level, but it was something they did to just, give Terang even more of a chance to crack that major league roster. Like, you know what? He can do so many things for us that we're comfortable bringing him up because we can use him in all these different situations. Again, even though they didn't. With Sal Frelick this last spring, working him in at third because they thought, at full staff, thinking that they had Mitchell at the time, that they needed to find this playing time for all kinds of people. And if that meant moving Frelick to third to get him in the lineup, then that's something they were going to try. Didn't end up having to do it because of that injury. And also Ortiz being fantastic this year, even better than a lot of people expected. They do that with these players all the time. And so I think just, again, maximizing that potential for some of these guys, especially the fringe guys, the bench guys, where, you have an emergency, you need to cover a certain position. That's fine. Our three guys on the bench can basically play every position on the field between them. So it just gives the Brewers more options, which they've always loved.
And last question, I promise. I keep saying that, but I promise this time. How many All-Stars do we potentially see on the Brewers? I'm not saying voting in as starters. I think starters-wise, it'd probably be Contreras and maybe Yelich, depending on how voting goes. How many total All-Stars do you see on this Brewer team right now?
That is tough. I wouldn't be shocked if it was one, to be honest. I think it should be at minimum two. We obviously, again, know Contreras. And I think Joey Ortiz, his numbers stack him up against the best third baseman in all the National League for the entire year. I think once it comes, he may not get voted in because people just don't know about him. There's a good chance he gets selected as a reserve, though, once, the All-Star manager looks at, who are the best third basemen, look at this Joey Ortiz kid. So I think there's a good chance he makes it too. But again, Yelich missed a lot of time, so it's hard for me to say that he would make it. I think Bryce Terang definitely has a shot himself. But again, he's also one of those young guys right now, like Ortiz, where he just doesn't have a lot of recognition. And you look at the pitching staff, at one point I would have said Brian Hudson, if he kept his ERA in that like 0.5, 0.6 area, where a lot of middle relievers don't make it to the All-Star game unless they're like that insanely dominant. But then he ended up having that blow-up outing. So I don't think he's really in consideration anymore. McGill wasn't a closer for the entire year. He kind of eventually made his way into that role. As good as the relievers have been and some of the other starters have been, I don't think they've been so good where you select them over other guys. So it would be crazy for a first-place team like the Brewers to only have one representative. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. And I think that would just be more motivation for the team. Honestly, we're a first-place team, and we get one representative. That's good. If that lights a fire under him, good. So I'll say Contreras for sure, Terang and Ortiz possibly.
The reason I brought up Yelich as an option, just that his name recognition might get him on with the production he's having. But that's why I specified non-starters, just because Yelich might get voted on either way, depending on how the outfield falls. Well, I appreciate if you want to let the viewers and listeners know how they can find your stuff, and always great insight. Enjoy reading your stuff. Enjoy seeing your, I don't even know what to call them anymore. I'm just going to say tweets. Seeing your about Brewer stuff and then your articles and that. I always enjoy reading it and following along. But it just let the fans of the show know how to find your stuff.
Yeah, I'll call them tweets until they block me off the site. So you can find me on Twitter at MKEMatt13. You can find our articles from myself and all the amazing writers for the site at reviewingthebrew.com. We also have the Twitter account, Reviewing the Brew That is minus the second I. That's just how it is, and we can't fix it. So it is what it is. Start typing review, and you'll probably find it. And then we also, Dave, site expert at the site as well, and I have podcasts called the Cold Brew Podcast. We have episodes every week that post on Fridays.
Well, thank you again. And with that, I will possibly be back on Thursday, but for sure next week have some Packer stuff to talk about now that OTAs are done. But podcast version of the show can be found anywhere podcasts are found. That's going to drop first thing tomorrow morning. In the meantime, the videos of the show can be found here on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at Evan with Sports. And then on YouTube and Facebook, just look up Talking Sports with Evan. Until next time, have a great rest of your night.